Hey, this is Denver Riddle, and in this video tutorial, we're going to look at how to get the most out of your images that are shot with the RED camera using Premiere Pro. Now, the RED uses raw recording to capture unprocessed images, and in Premiere Pro, we can actually dig into the original negative to adjust parameters like color, gain, and contrast. So let's take a look. I have a project that was shot with the RED camera in 5K, and because Premiere Pro natively supports R3D files, which is awesome, we can edit and color an entire project without having to leave the application. Let's look at some examples of how we can work with images using the RED RAW controls. The first thing I want to point out is that working with RED files can take a lot of processing power, and depending upon your setup, you may need to adjust the quality of your playback settings. To do so, select from the drop-down list in your viewer that includes full, half, quarter, eighth, or 16th. Next, you can access the metadata from the clips in the project window by scrolling to the right. And when you want to access the raw controls, just double-click on a clip in the project window or timeline to open it up in the source window. Then select the Effect Controls tab, and then the Master Clip tab, which will give you access to all of the RED RAW camera settings. It's important to note that any changes that you make to images here using the raw controls are non-destructive and can be saved as a RED metadata file or RMD to the same folder as the original R3D. Let's take a look at the raw controls. Starting at the top of the raw controls panel, the As Shot button applies to the original camera settings that were chosen on set, while the default button applies a neutral RED camera setting. Next, if an image was corrected or graded using RED RAW settings in another application, like say Red City X or Final Cut Pro 10, you could apply the correction or grade non-destructively using the Reload from RMD button. And if you create a look using the raw controls and want to save it, just select Save to RMD. I hope that makes sense. Essentially, what's happening here is the changes that you can apply to the raw settings can be carried with each clip. If you have a Red Rocket or Red Rocket X acceleration card, this drop-down menu is where you can select which card to use. Moving on, the decoding section is where you can determine the blend options for HDR sources and the level of detail used to debayer an image. The white balance section will open a window where you can use an eyedropper to select a white area in your image. You can also correct the temperature of your images using the Kelvin and tint controls. The next part of the RED RAW settings is the color management tools, a really powerful element in RED's infrastructure. First is the color version, where you can choose from the original color, version 2, or the newer IPP2. Because IPP2 is RED's latest color science, I recommend choosing that option. Next is the color space drop-down menu, which gives you several options that determine the range of colors in your project. It includes standards like Rec. 709 for high definition projects, Rec. 2020 for wide color gamut projects, sRGB for web projects, and RED's own color space options like Red Space, Red Wide Gamut RGB, Red Dragon, and Red Color. Next is the Gamma Curve drop-down menu with options that affect the brightness and contrast of images using RED's log and contrast curves. If you want to grade a project quickly for a television or web output, Red Gamma 4, Red Space, Rec. 709, or sRGB could be a great starting point. If you're working on a project that requires manual grading for a wider gamut or film out for theatrical release, then you might want to choose the other options like Red Log and Red Log Film. Another note I want to mention related to color space and gamma settings is that unless you need to match older footage, it's a good idea to always use the most up-to-date color science, such as Red Color 4 instead of Red Color 3, and Red Gamma 4 instead of Red Gamma 3. Now, if all these different options and color spaces seem confusing to you, don't overthink it. All I recommend doing is going with what gives you the best starting point or look, okay? As long as you're working with a calibrated monitor, which is a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, whatever shows on your screen and looks the best, go with those settings, okay? Next, in the menu of RAW settings is the ISO setting. The FLUT control, which is also like the ISO, but with more control, shadow, DRX, saturation, contrast, brightness, exposure, individual gain controls for the red, green, and blue channels, sharpness, and the denoise options. Adobe Premiere also gives you access to Red's curve tools, allowing you to make changes with a curve affecting all color channels, or you can make changes with the curves to the separate color channels of red, green, and blue. Finally, there are standard controls to edit the lift, gamma, and gain of an image. Let's look at how the raw settings can be used to improve our images. Currently, each image in this project is set using the color space red, white, gamma, RGB and the gamma setting for red log film. As I move through each shot, you can see how they appear flat and lacking color. I'm going to select a shot and change the color space to red color 4 and the gamma setting to red gamma 4. Instantly, you can see how the image has a more pleasing look with nice contrast and saturation. This method is really helpful when you want each shot to use the same color space and gamma setting. In this next shot, you can see how the image appears a bit on the cool side and also how the interior fluorescent lighting is adding a green color cast to the image. Let's start by adjusting the Kelvin setting to balance the color temperature. I'm using the white wall on the right as a reference on the waveform parade scope to balance the red and blue channels. Okay, that's looking better. Next, let's adjust the tint setting to pull back on the green color cast. And there you go. Let's see the before and after. The great thing about using the red raw settings is that making changes to one instance of a clip will make the same changes to another instance if the same clip is being used somewhere else in the timeline. In this next shot, we can see that the camera is underexposed with a blue color cast. Let's increase the exposure by changing the ISO to 1280 and bringing up the FLUT control. Then we'll correct some of the blue cast by adjusting the Kelvin. Let's bring up the shadows. And then the exposure a little bit to taste. That's looking great. Let's see the before and after. Wow, what a big difference. Once you get your images to a good starting point using the raw settings, that's when you then want to move into Lumetri to begin fine-tuning your grades and applying some really creative looks. So you're not going for a look with these raw settings, you're just trying to make it look as good as when it was shot on set. Deciding between the different red raw settings can depend largely on where your project will be viewed, and of course, what your personal preference is. Again, use the raw settings to get it to a good starting point, and then use Lumetri from there to fine-tune and to get creative. By using the raw settings during the base correction stage, and the color workflow will result with much cleaner images and will help you to work faster. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thanks for watching.